Let's talk now, though, to Tim Montgomerie, founder of Conservative Home, and former number 10 advisor, of course. Tim, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning. Well, I was next to Salisbury Cathedral on Saturday, Mike, having a cream tea.
Lovely.
With some friends and neighbours, and it did feel like a normal life is resuming again. It was absolutely wonderful.
And I've always said, Tim, that the sort of the slow walk out of lockdown will kind of happen automatically when people all just decide to sort of do it. And it seemed to me this weekend that was the weekend they decided to do it.
Yeah, we seem to have reached a critical mass. People have had enough now, I think, and they're ready to live as we should be living.
Yes, quite. And I mean, I'm very happy that you're on today because it strikes me that the paucity of opposition to Boris Johnson is now so awful. But he's so far ahead in the polls. He's so well liked by the people of this country that he does seem almost unassailable. And my question to you is this: what does it take to sort of knock Boris Johnson off his perch? What does it take to make him likely to be ousted in any way? Because I can't think of anything.
Well, I think if you, in a way, if I can, Mike, answer your question almost the other way around, why is he popular? And therefore, I think if those things are undone, I think we get to the answer to your question. And the fact is, Britain is set to be the fastest growing economy in the developed world this year. Boris said that he would deliver Brexit. He has delivered Brexit. And of course, because of the vaccine rollout, something that his government can certainly take credit for through Kate Bingham, who ran the vaccination task force, we are probably one of the safest countries now in the world from COVID after probably what was a shaky start. And so I think so long as those things hold true and we have an opposition leader who is frankly quite so useless, the Conservatives will stay ahead. My challenge, though, would be, I remember, because of my age, just about anyway, Margaret Thatcher in midterm elections, she lost lots of seats. She was unpopular. And that was partly because what she did was she didn't aim to be popular all of the time. She knew that the country needed medicine at certain times. It needed some tough love. And so she did the difficult things at the start of her parliaments, stuff that needed to be reformed, got reformed. And she timed it so that by the time of the election, things were beginning to pay dividends. The reforms that she introduced were showing that they'd worked. And people said, yeah, it was tough, but it was worth it. My question for Boris Johnson and this government is, they've had some tough things to deal with, but are they preparing the government for the long term? We have a massive parliamentary majority for the Conservatives. You don't get parliamentary majorities of this scale very often. Is the government using it wisely? The question for me isn't anymore, is Boris popular? We know he can reach voters that no other politician can. But is he going to be a prime minister that goes down in history as having done the stuff that the country needs?
Yes, and I think that's a very good point. I mean, I'm also tragically old enough to remember Margaret Thatcher, and she had a very different kind of landscape to deal with, didn't she? I mean, she had to do things like take on the unions, like stop the flying pickets, like stopping all sorts of things that had been going on for decades that were killing industry in this country, and she had to kind of revive the economy after years and years and years of neglect from Labour. But with Boris, he's inherited a relatively kind of stable, relatively successful economy, and I wonder whether he's sort of short-termist in the way that he runs the country, and maybe that's what people want. He doesn't really paint a big picture. I mean, the only thing he's really got in his armoury is this kind of green agenda, which for me and a lot of other people is simply the wrong agenda. But again, that doesn't even seem to be harming him. I mean, when you tell people, look, you're going to have to spend maybe 10,000 quid to get yourself a new boiler, people just kind of shrug their shoulders and go, I don't think so. They don't really buy it.
No, I don't think they think, because so many of the environmental targets are all about 2030 or 2035. And, given the year we've all just lived through, we can barely only focus on the next couple of months and just getting back to some sort of normality. But where I think I would, we are in a much better economic position than we were during the Thatcher years, etc. But I would say, if you look at some of the other problems in our country, the kind of education we're giving our young children, what our teachers are feeding our young people, the number of people that go to university rather than perhaps to some sort of technical college where they can get the skills that actually would suit them for the world that we're facing. I think there are some really tough decisions that a good Conservative government that was thinking about the long term would be taking those decisions. The tax burden now in the UK is really high. I think you've got the Adam Smith Institute on in a little while, and they have this tax freedom day whereby they sort of have a day where you reach in the year, which would be the day you would start earning for yourself.
Yes.
And that was only yesterday.
Yeah.
And with the Conservative Party used to be the low tax party.
Right.
But now, through all sorts of hidden taxes, we pay more tax than ever. And ultimately, that will pull down the UK economy. And so I think there are things that people like you and me, Mike, frankly, should be pressing the Conservative government to deliver, because yes, they're popular, but you're not in government for the sake of being in government. You're in government to do something better for your country, to leave the country in a better place than you inherited it. And I'm not quite sure that that's what this government is doing yet. They should be forgiven because of the pandemic. They've had to focus on that. But let's now move on. And the Tory party conference in October, let's hear a real agenda from them.
Yes, and without wishing to sound in any way kind of I don't know, just sort of disappointed with what they've been doing. It's I've said I think that it's the first time a Prime Minister has been this unassailable for a very long time, as far as I can remember. But it's also the first time when you look upon the way that the Prime Minister's office seems to work. It's very cliquey. It's very sort of, inside the beltway type people. There's very few, when you think of Thatcher's government, when you think of even Major's government, they had a lot of different voices, a lot of different quite big beasts who were, roaming around. This seems to be Boris and his mates basically running everything. Yeah,
and I think that's a really good criticism. And they, of course, got rid of a lot of the heavy, sort of the big beast remainers when Boris first became Prime Minister. And that was understandable because they were standing in the way of delivering Brexit. But I think Boris Johnson perhaps is a little bit stuck in that mindset still. Brexit's been largely delivered now, lots of implementation issues still with Northern Ireland, not least. But actually, Brexit's been delivered. Bring back some of those people who've been round the block once or twice, because you learn stuff. I learn stuff every year. What I know, I hope and believe I know more today than I did 10 or 20 years ago. I think, former prime ministers are the same. We seem to chuck them out so early when they've still got a lot to give. And so a few more, speaking perhaps self-interestedly, Mike, with my grey hairs here, but a few more people with grey hairs around the Prime Minister might not be such a bad thing, because we all learn in life as we go through, and just having too many people who are barely out of university, who've not lived in the university of life, is not a good way to run the country. No, it really isn't. And when you wonder about all of those sort of advisors who are seemingly very young, and some of them sort of seem to go in one door and out another door and then back in another door, they seem to be the same kinds of people. And we often used to moan about the fact that politicians didn't have much experience of the real world. Well, actually now we've got a great new swathe of politicians, particularly from the old red wall seats up in the north of England. Many of them, like Lee Anderson, who's come into Parliament at quite a late stage of his life, but talks an awful lot of sense, knows about ordinary people and what ordinary people, want out of life and want out of a government. And I think voices like that are really important too. Absolutely. And I think over time, hopefully, we'll get, I keep talking about Margaret Thatcher, but Margaret Thatcher loved having people around her who disagreed with her. Yeah. And ministers used to say the person they most feared going into an argument with was Margaret Thatcher, because she'd test them. Even if ostensibly they were on her side. She'd ask them the tough questions, because if you don't ask the tough questions in private when you're putting together a policy inside Number 10, people like you, Mike, when politicians come on programs like this, they'll be exposed then. And so I don't think there is enough sort of scrutiny and different voices to avoid the groupthink that Dominic Cummings was talking about last week inside Downing Street. And when you have a rich diversity of people from different backgrounds, people like Lee Anderson, I agree with you on him, you'll get that better government that this country needs. Yes, absolutely. Tonight, I don't know whether you'll be watching it, Tim. I'll be watching it out of a sense of duty more than a sense of desire. Sir Keir Starmer faces Piers Morgan on Life Stories. I mean, I thought the low point was when he was getting on sort of characters from various, celebrity I'm in the Jungle type shows. But to get Sir Keir Starmer on, I can't imagine it's going to be an incredibly popular show. But are we going to see anything that we didn't know he was like? I don't know. I think the public's made up its mind about Keir Starmer. My headline takeaway from him is that, he served Jeremy Corbyn all through the last Parliament. When he ran for Labour leader, he had pictures of Jeremy Corbyn in his video for leader. He was presenting himself as close to Corbyn. And then very early on in his leadership, he finally does the right thing and suspends Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party. But it just looks completely insincere to me to be so hypocritical, basically. And I think the British people can smell fakery. Yeah. And I think with Keir Starmer, they've smelt fakery. And I think it's very hard to recover from that.
I think so too. Apparently we've got a clip from Life Stories that we can have a look at. So you'll be delighted to know, Tim, that if you don't watch it, you can have a look at this.
Dad was totally devoted to her. And I remember being at home and he phoned and he said, "Your mum's not going to make it. Can you tell the others?" And that hit me.
I mean, I'm sorry, Tim, to have to play that to you, and I'm sure Sir Keir Starmer's had lots of trouble with that, as many of us have had. But I'm not quite sure what his motivation is for doing it. I mean, Piers Morgan, an old mate of mine, somebody that is a very good interviewer, likes to make people cry. I don't see the point of politicians doing this kind of thing.
No. Well, I'm afraid I'm a bit pathetic, Mike. I cry when Bambi's on and things like that.
Yeah, so I cry at the end of Casablanca,
Goodness knows what I'd be like on a programme like this. But, I think it is related to what I've just been saying. He's got this reputation for fakery, not being sincere. Yeah. And I think most people recognise that when you talk about your mum or your dad being in hospital ill, there's very few things where we are more real, where we are more human, because that is where life touches us at its hardest. And so I think they're obviously trying to show the side to him and say, no, he is real, he is human, he is like you and me. But I'm not sure it will work, because there's plenty of people that we know are sincere in our neighbours, in our churches and whatever, but we wouldn't want as leader of the country. Yeah. And so Keir Starmer isn't going to be judged on whether he cries when his gets bad news about his mum. We're all going to be emotional in those circumstances. He's going to be judged on whether he can take the tough decisions for the country, whether he respects something like a Brexit referendum or tries to overturn it, whether he's patriotic in his gut or whether he has to be told to have a Union Jack on the Labour stage because focus group says that it's good to have that sort of thing. And I'm afraid we realise that when it comes down to the stuff that matters, he's not really the same kind of patriotic Labour person that even someone like Tony Blair was.
No, exactly right. And just finally, Tim, I've asked this question to a lot of people over the last few weeks. Is there a future for the Labour Party in terms of who they represent, where they represent them? Having lost Scotland, possibly now the north of England, what is the political landscape going to look like in, say, 10 years? Is there going to be another party that comes out of, the sort of the liberal left? Is there going to be another party that replaces Labour? Because it seems to me that they're a bit of a busted flush now.
Yeah, and so I think Scotland, as you mentioned Scotland, Mike, so long as they are as back in third place in Scotland as they are at the moment, they're never really going to recover. I think we should keep watching on the, you said, the Green issue was one of the big issues. Yeah. I think we need to keep looking at the Green Party as a possible growing replacement for Labour. Look at the elections in Germany at the moment. The Greens are sort of level pegging as the top party in the opinion polls. There's a sort of an intellectual left wing now that has sort of have a completely different agenda from the working class left of old. And I think there's now going to be a battle as to whether that sort of political party, it's much harder in Britain because of the first past the post system, but I think we're going to see that sort of political party take chunks from the old Liberal Democrat vote, say chunks from sort of metropolitan Conservative Remain types, as well as the Labour Party. So I think it's a good position for the Conservative Party to be in because our vote isn't as splintered as the other parties, but it won't last forever. The politics isn't like that. First past the post is a system whereby if the people want to get a government out, they can get a government out and they'll find a vehicle for it. Whether the Labour Party is still that vehicle, time will tell.
Yeah, well, let's see. If the Greens are going to do much more in this country in politics, they'll have to get a lot less nutty, won't they?
Yeah, and the Greens in Germany are less nutty.
Yes.
But perhaps still too nutty for the Republic of your search.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Well, listen, Tim, delightful to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time. Tim Montgomerie, founder of Conservative Home, former number 10 advisor on a great many things. And I think a very good way to start the week in a second way, because we started the week technically yesterday, but it was Bank Holiday Monday, so many of you may not have been able to listen. We're starting the week again today, Tuesday. Because the big question for me is, is Boris Johnson completely unassailable? I have gone backwards and forwards on this. I have said at points that he's done terrible things, that he's gone too far. He's a very popular man. There's no question about that. He's done some very good things, and he's been a great leader for the Conservative Party. He's been a really good Prime Minister in some ways. However, in other ways, he has not. But the trouble is, because there's nobody really criticising him within the party, there's absolutely no point in anyone criticising from outside the party, i.e. the Labour benches, because they're completely and utterly useless. Keir Starmer, absolutely hopeless. The Lib Dems have more or less disappeared like the dodo and become extinct. The Green Party have got one MP. The Reform Party, formerly known as the Brexit Party, are going up in the polls, but only from 1 to 3%. So in the end, are we basically stuck with a Conservative government run by Boris Johnson for the rest of time? It may well be that that's true, but is that what you want? I'm not sure. 034